Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this Ed Week webinar, Using Podcasts to Improve English Proficiency and Engagement. Welcome to you all. Please tell us where you're dialing in from in the chat. We'd love to hear more about what you're teaching, what you want to learn, and questions that you may have. Questions we'd like you to put in the Q&A tab as well. But in the chat, just love to hear a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from. So by way of introductions, I am Monica Brady-Myerov. I'm the author of the recently released book by Wiley Publishing called Listenwise, Teach Students to be Better Listeners. And we're going to talk a little bit about the research in that book and some practical strategies. I'm also the founder and CEO of Listenwise, which is an online platform that leverages podcasts and audio for engagement and language learning for ELs. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Theresa Blanchard, EL Program Specialist in Sanger Unified. Hi, Theresa.
Hi, Monica. Thanks for having me today.
It is my pleasure. So today we'll be discussing how our Listenwise partnership with Sanger Unified School District came about and lessons learned, as well as dig into how podcast lessons can support all your students equitably while addressing district priorities using practical teaching strategies. So we have a lot to get to and a lot of good stories to tell, and also a few stories to listen to, because this is a webinar about podcasts and it wouldn't be one without listening to a few. First, though, I want to turn it over to Theresa to tell us a little bit more about Sanger so you can understand where her district is coming from and how it may relate to where you are teaching or as an administrator.
Thanks, Monica. Hi again. My name is Theresa Blanchard, EL Program Specialist from Sanger Unified School District in California. And we have 13,149 students. Of those students, we have about 14, almost 15% English learners this year that we are serving. That's about 1,930 students. Across a variety of different schools. So we have 11 elementary schools that serve TK or kinder through 6th grade. We have 3 charter or K-8 schools. We have 1 middle school that's a comprehensive middle school for 7th and 8th grade. 1.5 high schools. We're actually going to grow our high school and have 2 next year. A couple alternative ed sites, a new virtual academy that offers digital learning environments, and then an adult school and a preschool program. So we are really excited to be here. And I know already in the chat, I'm seeing a lot of great, locations of people who are joining us today. So thank you for having me.
And I'm, as I said, the founder and CEO of Listenwise. Type in the chat if you've heard Listenwise. Just give me a yeah. For those of you who haven't, Listenwise is an online learning platform that brings together about 2,500 podcasts stories. They're all short, between 3 and 5 minutes long, and they are accompanied by learning resources created for students in grades 2 through 12. So we have daily current events that are put up new every single school day to always give you something interesting to listen to and talk about. And then as well, we have a rich collections for English, science, and social studies that are tightly aligned to curriculum goals and standards. And these highly engaging nonfiction stories are about real-world events. So it really helps you connect what you're teaching to the outside world with a lot of extra scaffolds for English learners, because incorporating more listening for your ELs is so important. And we're going to talk about all the reasons why and how you can do that. Listenwise is a free resource for teachers, so you can sign up for free at listenwise.com. You can also elect to have a school trial at listenwise.com, and we can also offer a district pilot. That's a special thing we're offering as part of this webinar. If you'd be interested in that, please put your name and email into the chat. Thanks. So first, just a little bit on the research around listening and literacy. Because not only is listening to audio an engaging media, since storytelling is such a great way to learn, but it really builds literacy skills. And my book, Listenwise, goes deep into a lot of this research, but I thought I'd share a little bit now. So when you think about listening comprehension, it's really a fundamental building block of reading comprehension. If you look at the Goff and Tumner simple view of reading, it suggests that reading is a function of these two components, decoding and language comprehension. But underneath the language comprehension, a huge part of that is listening. And vocabulary also plays a key role in fluency. And listening, because students can listen 2 to 3 grade levels higher than they can read, this is just a great way to improve on vocabulary development for your ELs and for all your students. So listening while reading, and we'll talk more about how those two are connected, helps kids recognize sounds, they learn new words, they become better listeners, and they understand how stories work. So as I said, putting together listening and reading is really powerful. So pairing a pre-recorded fluent reading of a text is a powerful solution for learning. Read-along transcripts help students increase their accuracy while reading and improves comprehension by 76%. A study of third graders looked at them while using this Reading While Listening app, and it showed significant improvement over the control group. And what that showed was that students were reading a per minute count improvement compared to in the treatment group compared to the control group. Because, as I said, listening while also reading helps students see how words are spelled and hear how they sound. So I hope you're asking right now, well, how do I do that? How is it that you do that? And I'm wondering, Theresa, I know you have been thinking a lot about how pairing listening and reading supports not just ELs, but struggling readers. Tell us a little bit more how you do it.
Absolutely. Our district in Sanger, we have always been carefully kind of looking at our balanced literacy and early literacy data. And based on language proficiency and ELA data, we noticed that there was a need for us to really focus on and teach listening comprehension skills more explicitly. We knew that listening was a prerequisite skill for reading comprehension, but receptive skills can often be difficult to teach and assess. So we were just on the hunt for resources that would support our content lessons and kind of supplement a lot of both our ELD and ELA curriculum and our content curriculum at the secondary level. So we were really looking for something to support, especially our English learners, to develop that listening comprehension. And so we tried to share listening strategies. We, thought, we could help teachers learn how to build listening skills and stamina over time, just like what we do with reading. But teachers just really didn't have time to find videos or audio stories online that were connected to the topics and the standards that they were teaching. So, Listenwise came at a great time and provided a set of podcasts and listening comprehension resources that we had really been searching for, trying to create ourselves.
Yeah, those are some great points to share, Theresa. And this graph that we're looking at now actually came out of the Common Core in support of them adding speaking and listening as an anchor standard of the Common Core. And it shows that as students grow older, the relative importance of listening comprehension increases because it takes until middle school to reach the point where reading comprehension outpaces listening comprehension. And I think that's all something we should all remember and reflect on, because it means that you can be challenging your students with higher level vocabulary. You can be building their background through using listening exercises as they continue to build their reading comprehension strategies. So this is especially true for English learners, and that's why it's important to continue to focus on students' listening skills well beyond their years of direct reading instruction. Right, Theresa?
Yes. And I know when we first adopted Listenwise in our district, we really bought it for and purchased it for our English learners because we knew that listening was something, it was a domain that was assessed on their language proficiency assessment for the state. But we really wanted to make sure that we had something for especially our students that just didn't have the reading proficiency yet. So we can practice a lot of the comprehension skills and listening activities that build to that reading comprehension later. And our teachers that use the lessons in designated ELD to teach our ELD standards and practice listening skills, they quickly realized that Listenwise podcasts were valuable for all students. So they were asking, can I use this with my whole class? And this is something that especially our elementary teachers were finding that in those early grades that listening comprehension is worth focusing on and spending time on. And these podcasts really that Listenwise provides is it's a different representation for students who might be struggling with reading proficiency or just vocabulary and context. So listening is an integral part of a balanced literacy approach, and our kind of district was really in that, and is still today continuing to supplement our curriculum and add listening activities to build that stamina that our students need to be successful in higher grade levels.
Yes, for students who are struggling, audio content can really help close the gap. They can learn the meaning of unknown words through incidental exposure. We can use audio with higher level vocabulary to stretch their abilities, introduce them to new words, increasing their academic vocabulary. Now, you're wondering, why do I have a Bollywood film poster on this slide? And it's because I want to shout out to the Indian social scientist who was the first to document that reading and listening together improve comprehension. So Birsh Kothari in 2004 noticed that many millions of Indians were semi-literate or illiterate, but they were reading along to the closed captions when they were presented on Bollywood films. And with the catchy lyrics and the songs that everyone was using, you thought, wow, this is showing, I really believe that captioned while listening can contribute to literacy. So he developed an entire nonprofit out of this. He's since proven it in many research studies that shows captions while listening contribute to word recognition and word comprehension skills. And now same language subtitling is implemented on many Bollywood movies and on TV because of his research. And it's something that we believe in at Listenwise very strongly because of that, and many other studies that show how pairing the two can help improve comprehension. But podcasts as well are just can support a variety of instructional goals. We've been talking mostly about literacy here with English learners, but they can also help build your students' listening muscle. You mentioned that, Theresa, that that you've got to build the stamina. Well, research shows listening is a skill that can be improved with practice. Just because we're all, most of us are born hearing and have two ears and listen our whole lives, that doesn't mean we are good listeners. But you can work on building your students' listening stamina. Podcasts can also connect with their learning to the real world. As I mentioned, we're putting up current events every single day. These stories are created for typically an adult audience, but they're at a level with the scaffolding that'll help your students understand it. And we know how much students appreciate using resources that are real, that are authentic. Podcasts can be used to spur conversations as well, helping them discuss contemporary issues, build academic vocabulary, and then with the right resources on Listenwise, with a quizzing activity we have, which I'll share with you in a little bit, this helps students prepare for high-stakes tests. EL students are tested on listening in every state, whichever state you're from. There's going to be multiple times that your students are being tested on their listening skills. So it's a great idea to practice. And that's one of the reasons why I know you and Sanger were attracted to Listenwise. So let's dig in a little more about your amazing school district and how it was that you implemented listening activities through Listenwise. First, talk a little bit about your implementation and your priorities.
Absolutely. We have, obviously, in all school districts, our goal is to increase student achievement. And our superintendent has always been committed to, just making sure that, our students have equitable access to learning with, options and opportunities, as you're seeing our strategic plan there, to be successful and achieve their dreams. A few of these goals to kind of close the achievement gap and raise achievement is focused around balanced literacy. And so when we were looking at assessment, like you said, high stakes test data, we just noticed that, students weren't always doing well with the listening, domains and the listening strands of our assessments, especially on what was the CELT and now is the LPAC in California, so our language proficiency assessment for our state. So when we started, already 4 years ago, which is crazy to think we've been partners that long, we really wanted to find something, and in our district, we typically pilot things before we purchase something and try to roll it out district-wide. So on the next slide, we have kind of a year one I'm sorry, this is our district priorities, but we have really we just wanted to make sure that we were looking for something to fill in that gap. So I was jumping ahead, and we'll talk about year one implementation. Yeah.
No, I'm glad you just highlighted their priorities. My apologies for not advancing the slide, but I think that what's key here is the equitable access to learning and the balanced literacy approach, because I think those are 2 points that resonate with anyone who's on this webinar. And if you're on from a state that tests listening in the general student population as well, this is critical as well, practicing listening for the high stakes test. 22 states, including California, test listening on their high stakes test, in addition to the testing that's done on ELs. So it can be a way to help address and prepare students for that portion of the test, which is typically under the ELA portion of it, and make them feel confident and ready for it. So yeah, let's talk about the first year where we discussed, and we were partners. I felt like we'd really found a partner in you. Thank you, Theresa, for working with us to create a pilot that worked for your district, that would give you the buy-in, the results, the confidence that this is something that would work. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. We have a lot of really amazing, teachers in our district that when we wanted to pilot this, we started with our middle school and high school and looked at some of our designated ELD. We call them academic language development teachers. We also, though, wanted to kind of have some content teachers test it out and see how they could use Listenwise podcasts in kind of the content or integrated ELD parts of the day. So we had about 10 teachers that started. They were focusing on academic discourse because we had just finished kind of a PD series for targeting our long-term English learners and our at-risk English learners with Dr. Jeff Swears from Stanford. And we just needed some resources and materials to help practice some of those techniques and skills that he had shared with us to promote and develop academic speaking and listening. So we, focused year one, just tried to give them a chance to play with the Listenwise podcast, to really focus on building language and literacy within some of those activities. And we got some really great feedback, and they wanted access to it for the second year. So we went ahead and we continued, our partnership. So.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in here that, this is an approach we are willing to take with other districts, to begin with a pilot, to set some goals and talk with you about what it is that you want to achieve using Listenwise and audio resources, and building out a framework for it and giving you feedback and usage and some anecdotal feedback as well. I know, Theresa, you're also very involved in visiting classrooms, using it, speaking to teachers directly. That's something we'd love to work with other districts on. So if you're interested, put your name and email in the chat, say you're interested in learning more, we'll connect with you. But I know in the next year, we were really excited to see that the pilot went well and it went into a full district implementation. So tell us about that, the thinking behind that, and what it was that you saw in Listenwise that gave you confidence to bring it to the whole district.
Sure. In our second year of Listenwise implementation, we kind of tried to, spread the good news that, we have these licenses. We wanted our teachers to, really understand how and why they can use this with especially their English learners to support, a lot of, the listening or the receptive content that they were covering, to find some supplementary, podcasts. And we had a lot of fun just visiting classrooms, like you said, and seeing Listenwise in action, and how excited both the teachers and the students were to use these resources, and just the innovation slowly that, they got more confident to. And we started mostly, I think, with whole class usage, where, they would play a podcast and kind of use it to encourage group discussion. They would almost have that closed captioning with the transcripts up. And I know you'll have, examples of some of that and some of those strategies later during this webinar. But it's just, it was a perfect fit to fill the gap, of those missing digital tools and resources that we were looking for the listening comprehension. We had also kind of an initiative that I know we kind of rushed through that district initiative slide, but for effective instruction, we really saw the need for those literacy skills through listening first before we took it to a reading activity. So this just, again, was a great year. I think right before, unfortunately, the pandemic hit with COVID-19, we were seeing some really great application of Listenwise podcasts with current events and other subject area collections, especially too, even with science and social studies, and some of the literature for our secondary English teachers.
I was lucky enough to get in a visit to a few Sanger classrooms before the pandemic. Yeah, and I saw not only the whole class instruction where you can play the audio for everyone, excuse me, but also individual assignments where everyone is listening on their own laptop and preparing written answers to questions that we had provided or taking a quiz. Yeah, I saw a nice variety of use. And then the pandemic hit. Year 3, remote learning. We're all familiar with that. How did that go with Listenwise?
Listenwise was so easy to integrate for those that had really started using it in years 1 and 2, because, it just fits so nicely into remote learning, being that it's digital, and especially for upper grade teams for designated ELD courses. So the teachers who kind of had used it before and they had felt comfortable, that was something that they added to our, what we called ELD choice boards, where they had links to podcasts, or even embedded in some of our Canvas courses. They had direct links to some of the assignments. And in an asynchronous assignment, they were pushing out some of those quizzes, and students were submitting work, and they were trying to, just use it as flexibly as possible, in the, crazy, just transition that we all experienced. But it's, Listenwise is a flexible tool that's easy to implement in all settings, whether that be in person, virtual, or hybrid. So we were just excited that we had a resource already that we could use to assign either asynchronously, where students would listen independently, and teachers could still get some of that data on, what their listening comprehension was for different podcasts that were assigned, or they could use it during some of their live lessons, whether that be in person or virtual.
And I imagine that the importance of hearing stories with a lot of academic language was had really increased during this time of remote learning, because a lot of English learners were at home not getting exposure to English language in the same way they would if they were going to school. Did you find that as well? Did you hear about that from teachers who maybe upped their usage a bit with ELs to make sure that they're getting exposure to a variety of voices and vocabulary and background subjects?
Yeah, with only 3 hours of instruction at some points of the school closures and the pandemic, we really had to maximize, how much modeling and how much language really, the teachers, could or would be able to provide. So Listenwise, when it was assigned, was really great for our ELs to hear, audio stories and, everything. We know the research says that it's really good for especially our English learners to hear authentic modeled language. And Listenwise definitely is rich in sharing different perspectives and connecting students to more of that outside world that, we were all feeling very disconnected, even though, virtually connected, just, it kind of gave us a chance to connect to a different perspective or some different engaging topics.
And then year 4, we're in it now with you. Tell us about how it's going.
Yeah, so we are fortunate that we have EL site contacts assigned at every site, and their responsibility is to provide coaching and support for their teachers. So, I can really build their capacity and share these resources, and then their job and their responsibility is to take, and remind teachers, hey, we still have Listenwise licenses. We re-upped our, contract for 3 more years. You're going to have access to this. And we actually worked with your team, and I'm really excited to share out the curriculum mapping. We took a look at some of the topics that were being taught at each grade level and some of the units and lessons that were developed at each PLC and grade level, especially for our elementary grades. And, just your team was able to provide us some recommended podcasts that would fit in with some of those topics at each grade level, specifically, the science and social studies topics. So Listenwise really has, made a big difference with, our teachers who, have discovered the benefits of teaching with podcasts and have been intentionally linking and using Listenwise over time. But our goal this year really is to get the rest of the district to hear, how it's been going with teachers, both pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, and use that curriculum map and some of those podcasts to supplement their instruction and really start assigning podcasts and quizzes to get a better layer of data on our students, because we know that a lot of students are coming in with a lot of gaps and foundational skills that we really need to kind of focus on and accelerate. So assigning podcasts and using Listenwise is definitely something that we want to see, kind of come back into the focus. So we can use it during designated ELD. We can, connect and add content and perspective to some of our integrated ELD lessons, provide a meaningful context and frame learning, with, maybe connecting or piquing interest of our students with the weird news and the, current events types of podcasts. And in fact, like our second and third grade teachers were really kind of upset with us that when we first adopted, the suggested grade levels were 4th through 12th grade. And they're like, wait, what about us? And so when you guys came out with the weird news and current events, we're hoping that we can expand and just remind our second and third grade teachers, and even some of our K-1 teachers, that there's probably some podcasts that they can use both in designated and integrated settings and lessons to get their kids excited about the topics that they're teaching.
Absolutely. I'm glad you put on their expanded use, because when we first started working with you in the pilot, we were 6 through 12 primarily, 5 through 12. And then we expanded down 2 through 5. So now we're 2 to 12, and we've got these really fun, weird news stories, but we also have a growing collection of English language arts, social studies, and science, specifically for elementary topics. So check those out as well. And I think now will be a great time then to go into some of these practical strategies for teaching listening, because one of the first things I want to share is about this fun features we have called Weird News, which are 30 seconds long, but give amazing amounts of support and engagement, especially to long-term ELs, because one of the biggest barriers that LTELs have to reclassification is developing their academic language. They've had social language for a long time, but the CALPS is harder. So the stories we provide have a large number of academic vocabulary words, and they pack a lot in. And these weird news stories, we really focus on vocabulary. As you can see, we pulled out a couple of words that we want students to listen for. And then after they listen, we have several listening comprehension questions that use those vocabulary words. So we're really using these to promote vocabulary development. I'm going to play this story for you next, so here it goes.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Martin. Sometimes all you want is a familiar front porch. Maybe that's what was going through the mind of a yellow lab named Cleo when she traveled 60 miles to her family's old house in Lawson, Missouri. They moved out in 2018. The new residents recently came home to find Cleo lounging on the porch. She's since been reunited with her family at their current address. No one knows how she traveled those 60 miles, but it must be a really great front porch.
So there you heard a couple of great words, residence, lounge, reunited, current, all in 30 seconds. And you saw, too, that the transcript feature, that's the interactive transcript feature we've been referring to about this reading while listening pairing. It happens on every single podcast we have on Listenwise. And there's also the ability to slow it down. I know that comes really quickly, and maybe for an EL, that's a little too fast. But you might have noticed there was a little slower button in the top right-hand corner that allowed it to just slow down a bit. It sounds like, Theresa, you've been hearing from your teachers how much fun they're having with those, and that because they're short and easy to understand and fun to listen to, that they are loved by students, right?
Absolutely. We have our ELSA contacts that are, even yesterday I got a story about how someone walked in and the teacher was working with a small group of English learners during designated ELD. They had pulled, I think, a weird news topic because it was some sort of animal podcast. And each chunk of the, podcast, they stopped and talked about it. And, just students and teachers seem to really enjoy using these resources. And I know we're going to talk about Paul Hernandez, one of our original Listenwise advocates. He's a history teacher in our district, and also then an ELD or ALD teacher. But he just loves the culturally relevant content, especially as a history teacher, to be able to give almost like this primary source, bird's eye view or kind of closer look at someone's perspective, that we can bring into the classroom just to build culture and help students connect, whether they can, I think students are really overstimulated visually. Sometimes just having them listen and just track, will help them, with some of the, reading, and vocabulary and context skills that we're hoping for. But, he's been singing your praises since our first year pilot.
Well, I remember he told me how distracted his students can be with all of the audio and phone and video and chats and that listening just really brings them back to focus on one thing only. They can close their eyes and imagine the scene. And hearing so many different voices brings a lot of different cultural perspectives to them. And then he finds it really culturally relevant content on Listenwise that helps build a culture in his classroom. So he says that he deepens class discussion of family and identity by using podcasts about, let's say, refugees or new immigrants. So I'm going to play a clip that he shared with us and talked a little bit more about how using audio helped to deepen his instruction. So this is just a picture of Paul. Again, he's an 11th grade history and ELD teacher at Sanger. Here we go.
Absolutely. Our students, probably in late February, we were, hearing more about coronavirus. And one benefit of Listenwise is the current event section. So, our students were hearing more about this. They were asking questions in class. And so we found a great podcast, and it was containing the spread of coronavirus, or containing the coronavirus outbreak. I work with a team at Sanger High School, and my colleague, Angelique Tovar, she's great. We each have a different group of students. So I have more of the bridging students, the higher level students, and she has more of the emerging and expanding students. So we each use different features for our students. So I know for sure she would use something, she would use the slower button. She would slow down the audio for her students. And she would use a little bit more of the scaffolds. On my side, I would use less because, again, my students were a bit of a higher level. And yeah, the great thing about the questions you can also, you can ask as you go is you can edit them and make them, tailor them to your students. So what we did, just to kind of briefly go through it step by step, usually, with any great lesson, you want to hook your students or activate prior knowledge. And this was kind of built in, which is why we like the current events. Our students were already talking about this. They were already interested. So it didn't take much to really hook them and get them interested. After that, we used a lot of the vocabulary that was already built in. So there's a great avenue or a great resource for tier 2 and tier 3 words that they will hear. So what we did is we just front loaded some of the terms that they will be hearing in the audio, such as virus and quarantine. And those are really helpful just to get them, once they hear them, they'll have at least a basis of how to use them in English, how to use them in the writing or even speaking. So what we've also encountered is one of the reasons why we're using the current events is there's not a ton of front loading like there would be if I was teaching like a history, a lesson, or an English lesson. So we were adjusting our lessons because we were also getting ready for our state language proficiency test. So one way to obviously practice the listening skills was using Listenwise, and it's been a great addition over the past year and a half, getting our students on board and really improving their skills.
So Paul also shared with me that student engagement, he knows, is key to building a safe, positive school culture, and that can increase achievement and fosters creativity and community. And these are all research-proven practices too. So using stories where students can hear real people sharing their stories and experiences, and it being something that's happening today in the world, is really impactful. And he shared some of these best practices in the classroom. And I know, Theresa, you do a lot of drop-ins on your teachers and to see what they're doing. What are some of the things you've seen that work?
So we really have seen quite a few applications of Listenwise, and I know in the chat, it's I think from Doug, we had a question about how Listenwise podcasts are delivered in the classroom, whether we use headsets or laptops like speakers, and it really depends on how the teacher is using it. If it's whole group, it's a central speaker. Sometimes we have teachers using their smart boards or their kind of audio systems that are built into their classrooms. But, if it's a small group, they could use their laptop. If it's an individual student, podcast, then they're using their, individual headsets, or iPads. So there's a lot of different ways that I've seen Listenwise being used. And really, Paul has kind of been a pioneer in this. And as we see different strategies, whether it be chunking the podcast into smaller, excerpts and really discussing with the students, or having students pair share and kind of make meaning of the different vocabulary words or the concepts that they're listening to. We're just really, really excited that we have such a great collection of primary source audio files and just a window into the outside world, where our students really are going to be more prepared for college and career if we continue to expose them to these multiple perspectives and they take the time to become better listeners, especially if our teachers are, trying to assess then, how it's this receptive skill, like I said earlier, is such a hard thing to assess. We have on the state assessment, teachers who are using Listenwise, similar to the task of summarize an academic presentation, where they listen to a very academic presentation, lots of academic vocabulary words, and then they have to kind of give a retell. So they're practicing taking notes with these podcasts and then retelling. They're combining some of their notes with partners to summarize and retell. There's just so many different ways that we've seen teachers, use these podcasts. And then again, sometimes they're just pushing them out to students to practice on their own, and then getting, some data on the comprehension levels for their students. So we've seen a lot from the whole class, which I really love seeing it being used as a whole class in our designated ELD program with ELs explicitly. But, we've seen some really great applications with all students.
Well, what you might be witnessing, Theresa, when you see whole class listening together is that it builds empathy. There's research that shows when you listen together, you are building empathy. So that's one of the powerful things about audio. But audio is also so portable that it can be assigned really easily for homework and not have to be in front of the screen. It could be on the bus ride home or on the walk home, and just allow students to connect where they are. You mentioned assessments, preparing for tests. That's always important to make sure your students feel confident and prepared to do listening on a high stakes exam. So with our formative listening quizzes, they are online, multiple choice, auto scored, and they are modeled after the SBAC type quizzes that you'll get on listening, and in California, it's on the CASP. But as you can see here, they're primarily testing 4 strands of listening, for listening skills, I should say. Can you identify the main point? Can you recall an item in detail? Do you understand a vocabulary word in context? And can you make an inference? But what's great about it is that at the end of the quiz, the students get immediate feedback on how well they did. So if they're at home doing a homework assignment, they'll know immediately how they did. You could, as a teacher, reset it and have them do it again. Often students ask for that opportunity, and why not give it to them? That's great. More listening, the better. And then you, as the teacher or administrator, gets to see a dashboard that shows you how each student is doing on these key listening comprehension skills. Listening this way, too, also helps build some metacognitive strategies around listening, how you can help direct their attention when you start out. It's having students think about focusing and making meaning of words they may not know when they hear it. You're going to create a good environment to set up the listening. And then it's important to plan what you're doing before, during, and after the listening. Listenwise has in our lessons exactly spelled out instructions of what you should do before building some background knowledge, during maybe taking notes on a graphic organizer that you use on Listenwise, or other note-taking strategies. And then afterwards, maybe creating a written assignment like Paul was showing in that video, or taking a quiz, or having a classroom discussion. But the point is to create a goal-oriented listening, and so that the students understand why they're listening and what they're listening for. And then, of course, always reminding them that they're not going to understand everything they hear. They have to be problem-solving listeners. And what are your strategies for making meaning of something that you may not understand the first time you hear it? I mean, the good thing is you can always listen again, and you have the transcript. And Listenwise also has a great feature from Text Help that is a toolbar that pops up for students, and it allows words to be defined in English and Spanish, read aloud in English or Spanish, and even now can translate whole sentences and paragraphs into spoken Spanish. So very exciting support there for your English learners. And another area that like listening can help with is this building background knowledge. We know how important that is for literacy, but also for multilingual learners. You know, WIDA is now really turning its focus onto building language learning as a mean for learning academic content, not just language for language sense. As a language, the language is an excellent way for students to build content knowledge. And that's a key factor to reading success. So it's not just about learning vocabulary words. You know, we look to Professor Jeff Swears, who you mentioned earlier, who says there's a danger of over-focusing on just individual words. And when this happens, your in-depth understanding of content concepts gets kind of pushed aside. So, Theresa, I know you've also worked with Dr. Swears and thinks about this connection between content and language.
Yes, Dr. Jeff Swears has been just a wonderful partner as well to our district, and he's helped us discover the power of academic discourse and how important pair-share discussions are that are well-planned and structured, of course, just not always on the fly for, you know, those casual checking for understanding questions, but really, you know, giving students sometimes those prompts that are, you know, relevant and meaningful, so that they can also, you know, have some extra practice to possibly, you know, develop stronger and clear ideas, especially for our multilingual learners. We have, you know, a lot of, you know, I think pair-share discussions and academic discourse especially help students make meaning and provides a different representation than just the teacher saying it or just us hearing it. It just gives a chance for students to, you know, make meaning of their content and practice using the academic vocabulary and context when speaking, which then they can take those ideas to writing, if that is, you know, what the progression is for that particular assignment or lesson. But it's just been a great tool for everyone, you know, for us especially, to just have something authentic and engaging for students to listen to, because that gives students something that, you know, they want to talk about. So we appreciate, you know, working and pairing both Dr. Jeff Swears and Listenwise together.
Yeah, and I have a great example of that, Theresa. You set it up well, because this is an example of an interesting story that helps teach language and content together. So there's some pre-teaching or activating of prior knowledge that will help here, because it's a story about the Homeland Security Department and how it came out of 9/11. But it will help introduce vocabulary and phrases from the story that help with the context of understanding this content. Words like resiliency, bureaucracy, they may be more readily understood as a governmental organization or group, and you might need to set that up. But this story also includes a number of idioms, and all Listenwise lessons have tiered vocabulary. Paul mentioned that earlier. And in the tiered 3, where you're getting things like idioms and other expressions, it can be very rich and very hard, honestly, for a teacher alone in a classroom to cover idioms in a way that makes sense. But this is just a great example of how playing a story about a content area can help you build language. So I'm going to play just a portion of this story, and I want you to listen. Just take account of how many idioms you hear. Put it in the chat. We'll see if everybody agrees on all the idioms that you hear in just the next snippet of this story.
In its early days, the Department of Homeland Security was something of a makeshift affair. The first secretary, Tom Ridge, operated out of a double cubicle, a bit more modest workspace than most of his fellow cabinet officers. The different agencies' computers couldn't talk to one another, and there were the inevitable turf wars. Current Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano gives her predecessors, Ridge and Michael Chertoff, a lot of credit for getting the thing going.
I think that Secretary Ridge and Chertoff did yeoman's work in getting the department up off its feet. It's the kind of department that it's kind of you have to build the plane while you fly it. And I think that it has really begun to gel in an important way.
All right. Well, I got 8. I don't know about you, Theresa, but I heard 8 idioms in that less than 1 minute clip. A lot of credit, up off its feet. You could just stop with that right there and have a whole lesson on that. It's just a great example of how using an authentic piece of audio can really enrich language in a classroom. And we really help with the scaffolds up to this. I've shown you some of those already. But the idea is to not dumb down the audio, but to level up the scaffolding so that students can understand what they're hearing. We can slow down the audio, but we don't offer the audio in different levels because listening is an equalizer. Everyone can listen to the same audio with the right scaffolds. And I know, Theresa, your teachers have used many of these scaffolds that we have on the screen here.
Yes, we're really excited that the transcripts are so interactive. And as you had shared, a lot of the scaffolds that are now just continuing to be added with some of the Spanish language, resources, and the read along while listening is something we saw just now with the LPAC, especially for the lower grades where there's a read along story or a write along. So just knowing that there can be some shared and guided listening activities that, we haven't really seen much resources in helping students practice, I guess, for that kind of task type on the assessment. The comprehension activities, if students have, if we remove kind of the reading aspect and get students to listen multiple times to the text, and sometimes just, I've seen, Paul and the ALD team do it too. It's like, okay, I'm not going to give you the transcript. I'm not going to show you the transcript. I just want you to first listen. And then, then the second time we'll let you listen to the podcast with the transcript. And then we can clarify some of those confusing terms. And then really, again, taking notes for that summarized and academic presentation, being able to retell with the notes or pair share with a partner, combine some of their ideas together to provide a much more meaningful, summary or explanation before, again, taking some assessment or, writing a response.
Yeah, we've seen these interactive transcripts already, but I want to point out the top arrow to the right is something called the Lexile audio measure. And this is the new Lexile framework for listening. You're probably all familiar with the Lexile framework for reading. This listening framework allows us to know the difficulty of an audio passage and thus help make the right choice for each student. So it's on a Lexile scale similar to the one that's used for reading, but it's different because, as I've said, students can listen at a higher grade level than they can read. So on our site, when you click on the number, it'll explain what grade range band should be comparable to what level. And right now, we don't have the listening student measure yet. It's something we're in development for, so that you'll be able to do a more precise selection per student. But as it is, when you select the audio passage for students considering the Lexile measure, it can really help lead to success for them, right? To make sure that you get something that they're able to listen to and understand. I understand your teachers are relying on that a lot, right, Theresa?
Our teachers are definitely comfortable with, looking at data from our state assessments and looking at the reading Lexile. I know this is probably an area of growth for our district coming back from the pandemic. And I think we released the Lexile framework either right before or right in the middle.
Right before the pandemic. Yes, it's new.
But we are so excited because now with the curriculum mapping and having each podcast have a Lexile, it just helps our teachers, I think, understand and know what is grade appropriate for their particular group, whether it be by proficiency level, if they're working with a particular English language development group and they have grouped the students by listening, skills and proficiencies, or they're doing it with the whole class or using Listenwise with the whole class, and they really want to make sure that it's not way too high, because if they have like 2 grade levels to work with, students can definitely listen at a higher level, but we definitely don't want to overwhelm them with all of that vocabulary if it's a podcast that might not be as appropriate. So it definitely helps our teachers narrow down the choices.
That's great to hear. It is great to be used as a guide, and we're so thrilled to be the only tool that has this. We worked with Lexile and Metametrics to develop this tool. It didn't exist. I mean, I came from a background as a public radio reporter, and I assumed there was a way to determine a listening level of whether a story was really hard to listen to or easy, and it turns out there wasn't. But it's so key to literacy that this tool is a giant step forward in understanding how improving listening can improve reading. And the last thing we want to touch on is speaking practice. We've already touched on this a little bit throughout the presentation, but the standard is typically speaking and listening standard, right? And speaking and listening are 2 sides of the same coin. And as we mentioned, Professor Zwier's current work is deeply focused on coaching teachers and students to have fully engaging academic conversations across content areas. And these can be informal, quick, turn-in talks or debate topics. But they can start by listening to a high-quality text in audio format to be able to set up a conversation. So I have a great example of this from a teacher we work with in Tahoe, Truckee. She is an elementary ELD teacher, and she's going to explain the strategy she uses following using Listenwise podcast. So here is Abby from Tahoe, Truckee.
One strategy that I love just for like a pre-writing strategy, or even for a summary, like even after listening to a Listenwise story, is stronger and clearer. So they speak with one partner, and they maybe they write it in the chat for an older group, but for the younger groups, I just have them say their idea first, and then they go out into a breakout room and speak with one partner, and they build on their idea a little bit more and get it a little bit stronger. And then they do another breakout room and go with a different partner and try and strengthen their idea a little bit more. And then they come back to the whole group, and hopefully they have a stronger idea of whatever their maybe their small writing piece is going to be, or their hypothesis for for watching a science video, or their prediction of what's going to happen next, or if they're summarizing, they just have a stronger and clearer idea, and they get the chance to repeat it multiple times.
Well, thanks to her. And why don't we look back, though, to you, Theresa, and talk about, to wrap up, just some of the lessons learned that you'd like to share.
So we obviously have learned a lot as we've tried to kind of grow from our pilot group to district-wide implementation. But the thing that I would definitely just kind of want to add publicly is just how awesome your team is, Monica. The Listenwise team, anytime we had a question, they would often just send check-in emails and ask how they can help. And as an EL program specialist in the district working with all of my sites, that check-in just, made your team, I think, a little bit more human to me. And I appreciate, just their quick responses. It's been fabulous working with you. Also,
thank you.
The need to just go slow to go fast is been a common kind of adage, I guess, in our district, that we realize that sometimes jumping in and trying to, expect district-wide implementation is not realistic, especially with, how full everyone's plate is right now. If Listenwise or any district, initiative or goal is new, sometimes starting with a pilot, making sure too, we were able to get premium access then for teachers to try out the resources that, were not just the free resources on your website. And, once teachers got a hold of those premium resources, they did not want to turn back. So, we got feedback from early adopters. We really tried to check in with PLCs and sites that, we could see that, they were using it the most. And even, Adam just sent me a report, and I've already started flagging the sites that I want to, praise and congratulate for having such high usage, and then just check in with the teams that just haven't had a chance to maybe share the premium codes and the accounts and the login information with their teams. But, we had, I think, a couple PDs that we offered virtually last year. Chelsea, who's behind the scenes right now, she's been awesome. You've always been so responsive to be able to partner with us and provide the refreshers and the trainings that our teachers, really benefit from. And we're just going to continue to focus on growing and building capacity. I think that's been the biggest thing for us. We just updated our EL master plan. We've yet to share that out with the community, but that's coming soon. But we want to build our capacity beyond compliance. So we know we could teach out of a book, we could teach the standards, we could teach listening in isolation, but this has just been such a valuable tool to supplement and enrich, how we can support our multilingual students. And I just really appreciate, everything that you guys have provided for us. So thank you.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it, and I'll pass it on to my team. And I'm also happy to, again, extend the opportunity for other schools or districts who want to pilot, put your name and email in the chat, because as Theresa says, it's a great way to try something out and get feedback before committing fully. I know we had a question too in the chat around pricing. Our pricing is based on enrollment, and so it's something we can discuss. You can put your name in the chat and let us know you need more information, but it's really best to just go on listenwise.com and sign up for free or request a school trial. Like you could just get started on your own. That's what's great about the tool, is that a teacher can get started all on their own and build to a school pilot, and then we're happy to talk with you again about a district pilot as well. We are wrapping up, and I think I went quickly through the first slide where I said you could win a copy of my book. Yay. So book giveaway. Oh, Theresa's got hers on hand too. Oh, I love it. Thank you. A lot of the research and the strategies that I've talked about today are in this book. It's a really practical, hands-on tool. So if you want to go on that bit.ly and just register your name, we're going to be giving away one free book. And then also we're going to answer a few questions. But again, I just put up here, if you're interested in a free district pilot, let us know. I know one question we had in the chat was asking about the 22 states that test listening outside of ELs. How is that done? So it is done in states primarily that use the SBAC high stakes test. And it's interesting. It's done in a variety of ways. In Florida, it's commingled with reading. So you'd read a passage, listen to a passage, and then answer questions of the two synthesized. On the California State Assessment, the CAS, it is a listening passage with 6 or 7 questions dedicated to what the students have heard. And there is no transcript, but they can play it multiple times. And it makes up often as much as 20% of the ELA score. So if you're in a state that tests listening and you're not preparing your students, like helping them build the stamina for listening, know what to do when they come across a listening question on the test, you're really missing an opportunity to help them improve because it can vary from 12 to 20% of their overall ELA score. And that can be an easy way to just help them prepare for it. I see another question about just developing podcasts to improve literacy and assessment, especially for GED learners. You know, there are also great ways to make podcasts. And I know many of our partners who are using Listenwise, you know, their mentor texts is what they are. And we have a great toolkit about making podcasts that we can make available, or you can find on our website, that walks you through step by step how to have your students create podcasts to show their learning. And there are multiple free tools online. The technical part of it, honestly, that's easy because the students will all know how to use it and help you figure it out. What we provide is the instructional framework around creating a podcast to help a student show their learning. Another question came up is about having content applicable to adult English learners. You know, the answer is yes, because everything on our site was created originally for adults. Not in our younger collection. What I think is special about the 2 through 5 collection we've just put together for elementary is that we're using podcasters who are making content specifically for that age group. So it sounds different. It has more music and storytelling aspects. But in the collection 6 through 12, it is primarily taken from public radio, which is made for adults. So absolutely, there's plenty of content that's applicable to adult learners. Theresa, do you have anything to add about the CASP test and sort of gen ed students being prepared for that listening portion of the test?
I think you hit the nail on the head and said, you know, there's a lot of integration between the domains. So no longer are we assessing listening just with listening. You know, there's some kind of integration with the progression of activities that the students are having to go through, and sometimes a partner discussion about what they read or talked about or heard before then they answer some of those comprehension questions. So we're constantly trying to remind our teachers, you know, receptive skills can be deceiving. You know, when you're seeing a student who might look like they're listening, you know, we just need to make sure we get into the habit of building their capacity, their ability to listen to longer and longer passages. So, you know, that definitely ramps up very quickly in the grade levels. And as we've seen on some of the state released practice assessment questions on both LPAC and on our CASP assessment in California.
Thanks for adding that. Well, we've reached our time limit, and thank you for all your questions, first of all, and thank you for coming today and learning more about how you can use audio to support your English learners. And I especially want to thank you, Theresa Blanchard of Sanger USD, for providing all your insight and sharing your knowledge so that others can learn. It's really important, and I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone who attended today has learned as well. Happy listening.
Thank you. Happy listening. Absolutely.